A lot of people ask me about how I got my engine to be gold, so I thought I would make a video explaining the process of using spray cans to paint a motorcycle engine. Through this episode I will cover selecting paints, preparing your engine for painting, proper painting technique, curing paint, and reinstalling parts / touch-ups. When choosing paint, it is important to select a high temperature engine paint for two reasons. First, the surface of a typical engine can get upwards of 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Low temperature paints will break down under such conditions. Second, engine paints are designed to resist corrosion from common automotive chemicals such as gasoline and oil. Engine paints come in two forms, either enamel or ceramic. It is important to use only one type for all steps of a single project, so if you choose ceramic paint, then be sure to select a ceramic primer as well as a clear coat. When paint is metallic, it includes a ground aluminum. Usually the grains are very fine to provide a smooth, even luster. On paints described as cast coat, the grains are much larger to give the appearance of a hammered or rough metallic surface. So here I have some sheet metal that I've primed, and we're going to test out the 9 colors on it. So we're gonna see what all these look like. Okay, so this is cast coat aluminum. These both are cast coat aluminum. Don't trust the cap. Buying paint can be a bit of a hassle because paint colors tend to vary from their color card, or particularly the spray cap. There are two reasons for this. For one, cards and spray caps use different inks than what is inside of the can. Of course, they do their best to get something close. The second is that local conditions affect the ultimate color of a paint, such as the color of the primer chosen or the clear coat. Beyond that, color names are almost useless as a description. Two companies may sell a paint called cast coat aluminum, but the result may be as different as night and day. When trying to match a color, keep in mind that every color has a natural variance to them. For example, many companies make aftermarket components described as gold, but different companies differ on their idea of what gold actually is. There are a few different things that people think of as gold. There's this sort of lighter gold, which is here on the brake, which is pretty much just a metallic yellow. It has no red in it, it isn't any orange at all. This is the less common version because people don't like looking at yellow. They want a richer color, so here's the Super Sprox one, and it's actually a bit orange. I mean, if you saw it by itself, you would just think, oh, that's gold, but it sort of has a little bit of red in it to make it that color. This is what I ended up with as far as colors. So I've actually primed this and then painted all these colors. I didn't really try to do a good job of painting the colors on because this is just so I can see them. As you can see, there's a lot of bleeding stuff, and I've only done one layer. And I have sealed it so that then it will look like the color that it will be on the engine. These two colors are both called cast coat aluminum, and they're actually kind of different. Like this one's the one made by VHT, and this one's the one made by Rust-Oleum. So it's actually, this one's a bit darker and doesn't have as much of a flakiness to it, that kind of sparkle. This is the cast coat iron. And it is a lot darker than I had expected. Another interesting one is, here's the titanium. And that's actually got kind of a bluish hue to it. Then this is their normal aluminum color. And the odd thing is I can't really tell a difference, like a descriptive difference between that and their cast coat aluminum. It looks like the cast coat's slightly darker, but they seem to have the same sort of metallic color to them. This is the copper made by Rust-Oleum. So this is Krylon's copper, and that actually honestly looks like copper in my opinion. I thought I was going to be using this color, which is the burnt copper, but it didn't turn out that well. It turned out to be this sort of reddish. I would probably describe that as burnt copper in all honesty, but I thought it was going to be more gold than that. So then here's the gold flake by VHT, and then this is the last one is the metallic red. And I think that this one is a very close match, whereas that's clearly darker, and it isn't even as sparkly. Maybe see the blueness of that one there, and then darker still. So here's the color I was actually trying to match. It's very gold color. It's not as light as that one, but it has a little bit of red to it, and that is actually almost a perfect match. This is definitely darker than that and less yellow. So I'm gonna repaint that, as well as the engine side case is gold, and I think that's it for choosing colors. Then it's time to choose what you're going to paint. Keep in mind that whatever you paint must be removed from the engine. This particular method cannot be used to paint an assembled engine. Generally, component covers work best for painting, since they don't contain many bearings or seals that might be damaged by the process. Of course, if there are any bearings, seals, or bolts, really any other components from what you're painting, remove them. Although it is possible to protect these components through the process, to do so is quite risky, and I find that removing the parts is not only cheaper, but reduces your chances of damaging your engine to basically zero. From there, use a degreaser and paper towels to thoroughly clean each component. Any oil or dirt left behind during the painting process will cause you problems down the road. When painting anything, it's always beneficial to sand beforehand. A rough surface will provide for better adhesion. As well, sanding will remove any remaining mineral deposits and uneven coloring that might bleed through. For the majority of engine parts, sanding by hand is entirely quixotic. With molded contours, imprinted text, and other nightmares, the only real practical method to sand engine parts is by using an abrasive sandblaster. If you don't have one, they are a fairly inexpensive tool available at any store which sells pneumatic tools. Sandblasters are essentially just an air tool with a secondary hose leading from a bucket of sand into the nozzle. When the trigger is pulled, a vacuum is created within the gun, pulling sand into the nozzle and driving it out with the fast-flowing air. The sand is quite painful, and the ricochets will hurt, so cover every inch of your skin. Plus, get a face shield. The sand will scratch up any transparent plastic covering your face, so be sure to use something cheap and disposable. Although special sand made up of minuscule glass beads is sold for blasting, this stuff isn't necessary. I use sand intended for play boxes, and it worked alright, though I would recommend running it through a window screen to remove the larger bits, which tend to clog your blaster. Be sure that your sand is dry before blasting. Wet sand will clog your blaster quicker than anything. If you blast in an area you don't mind leaving some amount of sand, even with the most scrutinous of cleaning and preparation, you will ultimately leave some sand wherever you end up blasting. Only like 10 minutes, it's almost completely clean. I mean, even covered in sand, but kind of amazing. Alright, so here it is done. You notice I didn't actually get the oil cover, but that's because I have an aftermarket one. And I actually didn't get all the paint off. There's a lot of places where there's contours where it was hard, and I've been at this for like about an hour now, and I kind of just figured this is good. I mean, the key is to not necessarily get all the paint off, but to make it so that the new paint will stick. So to rough it up, mostly, so that this gets pretty dirty. It's dusty, so it's a good idea to wash it. If you can, you want to blow it off with an air blower. You have an attachment for that for your air compressor. Sand is bad for your engine, as you might imagine. So this is why thoroughly degreasing parts is so critical. Sand will stick to oil residue and will not blow away easily. Regardless, I recommend blowing off each component, soaking it for a few hours in a bucket of soap water, or running it through the dishwasher, then allowing them to dry before using the blower a second time. Though it is unlikely that you will remove every bit of sand, this shouldn't deter you from painting your engine. Motorcycle engines have ways of collecting sediment within the oil to protect against stray particles. I'll cover this more towards the end of this video. Before painting, be sure to prime the components first. This provides an even base for your paint to go on, as well as being a much more adhesive surface when compared to the paint layer. If you don't prime, your paint will chip much more easily and will appear uneven. Like painting, priming must be done on a relatively warm and wind-free day. High temperature paints are oddly sensitive when it comes to temperature. Below 60 degrees and they will dry unevenly, so really don't try to cheat. Wind, for obvious reasons, can blow debris into your fresh paint and redirect spray chaotically. Wherever you paint, be sure it is well ventilated. The propellant used in engine paint is different from that of latex spray paints and may affect people differently. When priming, spray 8 to 12 inches away from your target, using short, strafing bursts. You may want to practice a bit on some scrap metal before moving on to your engine components. Here I sprayed in half-second bursts over a few inches of engine. Don't worry about covering 100% of the surface during your first layer. It is far more important that you don't over-apply paint. If you ever see droplets form, then you've added way too much. Generally, you need to apply 2 to 3 layers to completely cover a component without overdoing it. Once you've primed a layer, wait 30 to 90 minutes for each subsequent layer. Again, don't worry about covering the entire thing with each layer. For these, you really only need to concentrate on what you missed with your first coat. After you've finished priming, it's time to paint. The process of doing this is very much the same as priming, but there are a few additional things worth noting. Don't worry too much about getting paint inside the engine. It won't really cause problems in small amounts, though you may want to cover the inside with something like painter's tape. You will need to apply 3 to 6 layers of paint to get a rich and even color. This will take time, including about 90 minutes between layers for drying. In addition, it is absolutely necessary that all the layers be applied in one sitting. For some reason, if engine paint is allowed to dry overnight, and additional paint is applied later, the paint will look like the cracks in dried mud and rub off easily. I was forced to redo these parts after making this mistake. Metallic paints tend to require more mixing than those of solid colors. As well, they tend to be very easy to over-apply. This is mainly because metallic paints are transparent in order to show the bits of aluminum within. I recommend being very conservative when applying each layer. Don't worry about getting a solid color when you paint your first layer. Any more than a hint of paint seems to run. Really, the only way to do this and have it look good is with very many thin layers. The next step after painting is to apply clear coat. This will protect the paint from superficial damage with a much harder layer of transparent paint. As well, it will add some depth to your paint scheme. Generally, clear coat will make painted surfaces appear glossy. This is good because gloss surfaces are smooth and won't rub off so easily. As far as how clear coat will affect your color, know that no clear coat is perfectly clear. From my experience, they tend to be slightly yellow or brown. Some are a bit better than others, and usually you can't tell unless you apply several layers to a perfectly white background. Clear coat does have a tendency to get foggy, and will come out in clumps when cold, or even a bit at room temperature. I find that it's best to warm up the clear coat before application for best results. To do so, warm a pot of water to boiling on the stove, remove from heat, then place the canister in the hot water for a few minutes before you spray. This isn't as dangerous as it sounds. Spray cans are designed to endure temperatures upwards of 200 degrees Fahrenheit without failure, and should they fail, they will blow out the spray nozzle rather than detonating. I have never had a can fail when placed in boiling water, but do so at your own risk. Regardless, never place the can on an active heat source or in a pot that is being heated. You might forget about it and blow up your kitchen. Before using the can, spray a bit on some scrap to clear the nozzle and bleed excess pressure. Applying clear coat is fairly simple in comparison to painting or priming, and follows the same rules. Expect to apply 2 to 4 layers of clear coat for best result, and keep in mind it might be difficult to tell how much you're applying with each spray, so it's best to be conservative rather than to overdo things. Here I have all my engine parts, which I need to throw in the oven to bake in order to cure the ceramic paint that I put on here. In order to do this, I need to bake it at 200 degrees for about an hour. What's happening when we bake this paint is that it is forming a polymer. The ceramic is binding to itself and making it this hard shell, so it'll be resistant to scratches and more resistant to chemicals. As well, it is evaporating any remaining volatile compounds that exist in the paint, so this will become much more durable. Now it's important that the pieces do not touch each other and have minimum contact with the racks. And now, it's time to put it all back together. First, clean off the insides of your components with a wire brush to ensure that any loose gasket or paint is removed. Replace all your bearings and seals, then attach with new gaskets. When reapplying the parts, you will get some chipping around the bolts right here. This is, well, a bit of a consequence. You can see it all around each of these bolts. Something I didn't think of at the time, but what you can do to correct this is, with an X-Acto knife like this, go and cut a circle right around the flange where the bolt would be. Just etch it, kind of like with the blade edge. And that paint will chip off, but it won't be as noticeable. You won't be able to see it if you cut around these edges. Once you've got everything back in place, it's time to do a short break-in. Basically, you're trying to remove any sand that might be left behind, as well as any paint that might flake off in your engine. All you really need to do is run the engine at low RPM for about half an hour. Drain the oil, and then replace your oil filter. When I did this, I found a number of paint flakes on my oil filter and a small amount of sand. As well, the oil I drained looked like it was mixed with glitter. Still, after 3,000 miles, had no issues, worked perfectly fine. This is the sediment trap where it's supposed to collect any particulates while the engine is running, usually from a break-in. That's where I should expect to collect any sand or anything else that I have left behind in the engine. All in all, I'm actually very impressed with how this paint has held up. And it is very dirty right now, but as you can see right here, you might be able to see, there's just a little bit of rubbing from my boot right here where it rubbed off. Well, there's a little bit of rubbing here, but it's not quite as bad. This is after a pretty much full season of use. But I am very impressed with how hard this stuff is. It's actually just about as good as the original powder coat that was on there. So I do very much recommend this. I am pleasantly surprised. If you ever need to do touch-ups, what you can do is you can take your spray paint and just spray it on a paper plate. Get a little bit of it here. Brush, just put dabs of it anywhere that there is a chip. That will cover up this pretty well. You don't want to go and try to cover up a whole huge area. Just the spot that you need.